Hello, this is a Pacesetter training video, part 1 of 2. This video is going to deal with how to address trees in the field, when we have coverage on trees and when we don't, and how to take photos. The second video will deal more with how we write trees in Xactimate, when we can cover that. So let's talk a little bit about how and why and when we can cover trees and when we cannot. So most policies will state that plants, trees, and shrubs are excluded from coverage. They have no coverage when they are damaged from the perils of wind and hail. What that means is the plant, the tree, the shrub will have no coverage on it in itself. In other words, the tree is not insured when it is damaged by wind or hail. This again is plants and shrubs. That means grass, flowers, bushes, anything like that, including trees. None of that is covered by wind or hail damage. They don't have insurance on them individually. There is coverage on those items for other perils. For instance, if lightning hits a tree, fire burns a tree or a couple of trees down, something like that. Vandalism, let's say a drunk driver comes up in the yard at night through the insured yard and damages their lawn and runs over their flowers, that would be covered. We would have coverage on that. So keep in mind that when you go out, you've got to look for this to see if we have coverage or not on removing that tree. So there's 3 criteria that will dictate that. Number 1, the tree must hit a covered structure. That would be the house, a barn, a detached garage, a shed, a fence, even personal property. For instance, if a tree is felled by wind and it lands across and smashes a wooden swing set, we would have coverage on that. It has to hit something that is covered under the policy. Number 2, it has to damage that structure that it hits. You may find that a little bit obvious, but sometimes it's not. There may be instances, and we'll see a picture here shortly, there may be an instance where the wind blows a tree over at an angle towards the house, and it stops 2 inches from the house, and none of the tree touches the house whatsoever. In other words, it doesn't hit it. That would be an instance where we don't have coverage. Let's say in the second scenario, that same tree is blown over and it's barely touching the house. It's touching the edge of the shingle. Maybe it just bends the shingle down a half an inch and there's no damage or anything to the structure. There would be no coverage whatsoever to remove that tree. That would be on the insured. The third criteria is that if it hit a structure, if it damaged the structure, it has to impede the repair. It has to be in the way of repairing that damage. If those 3 things are in place, now you have coverage and you can remove those trees. Now, there could be some instances we'll talk about here that those 3 are not met. We talked about a couple of those where it barely touches the house or the structure, but it doesn't damage it. Or it leans the tree over, but it doesn't damage or hit the house. Sometimes there'll be dangling limbs. The insured is concerned about that. They'll say, well, does the policy pay for that? It might fall on the house. The wind broke a limb out and it's hanging. No, the policy does not cover that. It doesn't meet those criteria. There's no insurance on that tree for if it gets damaged by wind. The insured would need to pay to pull that out. Let's have another scenario, and let's say a tree limb falls out from wind. It lands on a detached garage on the left slope. It damages some shingles, and it falls on the ground. And it doesn't do any other damage to that structure. It just damages the shingle. In that case, we would have no coverage. We could not remove that tree in any way. Why? Because it's not impeding the repair. Did it hit the structure? Yes. Did it damage the structure? Yes. But it is not impeding the repair. It's not still sitting on the roof in the way of repairing those shingles. It's out of the way on its own. It rolled off the structure. There would be no coverage to remove that. Another scenario where we would be able to pay for that tree limb on the ground is if that tree damaged the roof and the limb rolled off, and on the way down it broke some of the wood fascia on the left, And then it fell down on the ground, and some of the pieces of the limb scratched up the paint on the left siding of the garage. Let's say it was wood siding and it was painted. That is damage to the paint, and that is damage to a fascia. Well, the contractors cannot repair that if that tree is in the way. So we would need to remove the limb. We would need to remove that limb, even though it's away from the structure a little bit. Now, if it rolls away enough distance away where you can get ladders in, we may not pay for that. But if it's close enough to the structure where it's going to impede the repair, the contractors can't really work properly, you can pay to remove that tree. And a good way to show that is to take your ladder, put it over there and stick it all up in the limbs of the tree limb down on the ground and show that it's difficult to work in that area. And that would help everybody understand. So just keep that in mind. It's got to meet those 3 criteria before you can pay for any tree removals. So let's look at some photos here. So here's an instance where wind has blown a tree down in let's say, our insured yard. Now, there's a couple of things we can look at. In this case, there's a sidewalk that comes up, or a walkway, concrete, that comes up to the insured's house. So this is on the insured's property. Now, if this sidewalk was not here, let's say this was just lawn, grass, we would not probably be able to do anything with this tree. We can't pay for it. It's not hitting any covered structures, number one. So right there, that excludes coverage. Now, if in this case we have this walkway, and if you were to see, it very likely did, we can't see in this photo, but if you were to inspect this and you're showing some cracks, it broke pieces of the walkway out, you're going to take pictures of this, of course. In that case, we could remove a portion of the tree. We wouldn't remove the entire tree, and we'll see this method we're talking about here, removing a portion of the tree, in some of the other photos. Remember, the tree is not covered. From the root ball to the very tip of the tree, we're not paying for that whole tree. If it damaged some of this walkway, we would only make a cut a reasonable distance away from the sidewalk on each side and pay to remove only that portion of the tree and get it out of the way so that the contractors can make the repairs to the walkway. The remainder of the tree, the stump and the root ball, and all of this tree way out in the street, the policy doesn't pay to cover that. Why? It's not in the way of impeding the actual repair of the damage of the item that is covered. None of this out here is covered. This is the street. There's nothing here on this end that is damaged. It's just grass and lawn and the tree itself. No coverage for that. Keep that in mind. Let's go to another photo. In this case, we don't have a walkway. There's no covered structures that were hit by this tree. There would be no coverage whatsoever to remove this tree. Unfortunately, the insured would have to pay for that. Another good example. No damage to a covered structure, or at least that we can see. But if there was nothing under here that we would owe for, no coverage to remove this or haul this tree away. Now here's a couple of tree photo that we're going to talk about, a couple of instances we just mentioned. The wind blows this tree over, but let's say you get up here and look, and this tree is 2 inches away from that fascia in that roof. And none of these limbs are leaning down and damaged any of the roof or nothing. None of this tree hit the house at all. There would be no coverage whatsoever to remove this. Is the tree damaged? Yes, it is. Is there coverage on the tree itself? No. The tree is not insured for damage from wind or hail. Didn't hit a covered structure? That stops coverage right there. It did not hit a covered structure. Second scenario, let's say that it blew over and you get up and look and it just barely touched the shingle, and that's it. And it just bent the shingle down maybe ½ an inch. And you look under there and there's no damage to the shingle. It didn't break it, crack it, scrape it up in any way. Did it hit the structure? Yes. Did it meet the second criteria? Did it damage the structure? No. In that case, again, we would not pay for this tree at all. None of it. Certainly, you're going to want to take good pictures in each of those scenarios around here to show what's going on and justify your reasoning for not paying for that tree. Let's move on. Now we're getting into some pictures where we are paying for trees are hitting the structure, obviously. This is an example of stand back when you're taking photos and show us most or all of the tree. It's cutting a little bit of the tree off here, but this would be a little bit better photo if it was back a little further, showing the whole tree. Take a couple of 2 or 3 photos if you need to from different angles, showing the entire tree so that we can see how big it is, how long it is, where it's laying, where it's going. Is it overhanging other structures? And again, take a couple of different angles of that. You'll take some mid-range shots is a good idea too, and some close-ups. This is another good example to say about how much of the tree we would pay for. We'll talk about stumps and root balls here shortly, but we wouldn't pay for this part of the tree right here probably. We would make a cut here, pay for all the rest of the tree, but we wouldn't pay for the stump or the root ball. Why? Again, it's not covered, and it's not in the way of repairing anything that is damaged. But we do need to get the tree off. So we would probably make a cut down here somewhere, leave the stump and the root ball alone, and pay for the rest of the tree. Another good picture of showing the tree on the house. We would want some other angles. In other words, maybe standing back here in the driveway, or probably further back. That'd probably be too close. But getting back across the street or in the street and taking a lateral view of this tree, showing the full length of the root ball to the other end. This is a good photo, though. This is just another angle. Again, this is why it's good to take different angles of trees so we can see what's going on. Again, in this case, we probably wouldn't pay for the root ball. We would make a cut down here close to the stump, pay for the rest of the tree. All of this would be no problem, but we wouldn't pay to repair this root ball hole or get rid of the stump or grind any stumps. Again, the caveat to that is if that stump or root ball was pulled up and it's damaging something that is covered under the policy that the insured owns on their premises, yes, we would do that. And we'll see this here shortly. These are some mid-range shots we talked about after you take your wide overviews of trees. Get a little closer and take some pictures of some mid-range, just to give us an idea of the areas that the tree impacted. We can see a little bit more about what type of materials have been damaged and how the construction is built. It helps us give us some more information, the file reviewers as well. This is another good example of that kind of a mid-range shot. Certainly you can take even close-up, closer shots. I would recommend that of the various areas. The fascia, the fly rafters, there's paint under here. Get closer, take specific damage of the window frames and trims, whatever that may be. So a good idea and method is to think of 3 ranges: far back overviews, mid-range shots, and close-ups of specific materials. Here's a good example of looking at a tree that's fallen into a house where we can pay for some items, but we cannot pay for other items that the tree damaged or portions of the tree. So, would we pay for anything on the house that was damaged? Of course. Did the tree hit the house? Yes. Did it damage the house? Yes. Did it impede the repair of the house? Yes. I'm assuming there's part of the house over here. It's kind of hard to see, but we'll say, yes, this is still part of the house over here, the structure. So, yeah, we would probably make a cut again down here. We would pay to get all this tree out of the way and then haul it off, no problem. But what would we do with the stump and the root ball down here? So this damage is to the curb and probably to the street. We can't see the sidewalk over here, but there could be damage, maybe not. This property is owned by the city. This is not the responsibility of the insured's homeowner's policy. So this damage would have to be covered in the street and the curb repaired by the city. Typically, that's also the case with sidewalks. You can certainly check if that's in a claim you have, you can check with the local municipality to check, but typically sidewalks are going to be covered by the municipality. So if that's the case, we wouldn't, number one, pay for those repairs, and number two, we wouldn't remove any of that portion of the tree that is damaging those items that is not covered under the insured's policy. Same thing here with the electrical service lines. We would not pay for that. That is the city utilities responsibility. They will restring and repair all of those lines. Let's move on. Here's another example of a tree that's fallen by wind, and it's clipped our insured's front porch. So yes, we certainly have damage. Certainly the tree is in the way of the damages. We're going to remove this. Again, it looks like we don't really have anything over here. We might have a sidewalk or a walkway. It's difficult to tell that's going by the tree, but if this root ball being pulled up damages that concrete and this walkway, we would pay for that. We would pay for the insured's walkway. That's on their property. And in this case, we would go ahead and pay to remove the root ball and everything too, because it's in the way of making the repairs to that walkway. Keep that in mind. Here's another example of stumps. We would not pay to remove the stump. We would pay to remove all of this tree. So we would pay to probably make a cut here or just cut this right here off the stump, pay to remove all of that tree and haul the tree debris away, but we would do nothing with this stump right here. It's not in the way of making the repairs. This is another good example. We would not pay for the stump or grind it. We would pay for any damages owed under the insured's homeowner's policy for the tree damaging the property and getting that tree out of the way if it's in the way of the repair. Now, let's say that this is the neighbor's house over here, and this is the insured's house. In this case, we would not pay for any of this. We wouldn't pay for any of this tree. We wouldn't pay for any of the fencing. It looks like this is on the neighbor's property. It's not splitting the property line, so this probably is owned by the neighbor. And certainly the insured doesn't own the neighbor's house. So all of this would be covered by the neighbor's insurance policy. Their adjuster would come out and pay for all of this. In your situation with your insured, you would pay to repair these damages and then probably remove all of this tree, haul it off because it's impeding this repair. Same thing if it was vice versa. If this was the insured's house, your insured, your claim was on this property, this is the neighbor, we would pay for all of this. We would not pay for any of this. One thing you might run into insureds sometimes ask about is they'll say, well, my neighbor's tree fell on my house. Their insurance policy needs to pay for it. Or vice versa, the neighbor says our insured's tree fell on their house. Our insured's policy needs to pay for it. That is not the case. It doesn't matter where the tree is located. If the tree falls on covered structures, that insurance policy for that structure and that property is what will take precedence to pay for that damage. So just keep that in mind. Let's talk a little bit about cranes. So as you probably are seeing already, each situation for a tree on houses or structures is case by case. It's very specific. Yes, there are some general rules that we're abiding by. However, trees, houses, structures, the size of the trees, where they're laying can vary wildly. And so it's a case by case basis of what we're doing and how we're doing it. In some cases, we may want to include a crane. Typically, cranes will be involved when it's difficult for the tree removal contractors to get in and remove large sections of trees safely without causing other damages to existing structures on the insured's property or maybe the neighbor's property, damaging their property. They can't get equipment in there, so sometimes we might need a crane out in the street or something to reach over with a boom where they can make those cuts and the crane can lift off those heavier sections onto the ground safely. So just keep that in mind. In this case, this picture is showing the houses are pretty close together. This looks like a pretty big tree. It may not have been on the house. This instance may have been just the insured getting a large tree that was dead or something and cut. But let's say the tree fell on the property and we were going to pay to remove it. We may need a crane to get that off safely so we're not causing any other damage to our insured's property or these very close structures to our insured's property. Here's another photo that's something like that. We have decks below this. Maybe there's a large tree up. Maybe we need a crane. We might deem it a little bit unsafe to where we're making cuts on larger parts of the tree up higher. Some of those tree parts could potentially fall into the house or fall down and damage other covered structures that maybe aren't currently damaged. Maybe we don't want to do that, so we may want to get a crane involved. As long as you can justify using a crane and show us pictures and explain your reasoning why, and it's good solid reasoning, that's going to be fine. No one's going to disagree with you. Also, keep in mind that when you include cranes, make sure you include a couple of 2 or 3 hours for getting the crane to and from the job site. They have to haul, or if the train's maybe it's mobile and it can drive with tires, they can drive it, or they'll put it on a trailer and haul it. Either way, they've got to get the crane to the job site and from the job site, not just the hourly rate that we would put in there for the work at the job site. Just keep that in mind. Here's some trees we're going to talk to you about fencing. Yes, we can cover getting trees off of fencing. This also applies to personal property, which we'll see here shortly. However, on trees that are on fences and personal property, we can cut and get the tree that's in the way off of the fence or personal property, but we cannot pay to haul that tree debris away from the premises. That is not covered under the policies. Most policies we deal with affix, and most policies in general. Again, you can cover hauling trees off that you take from houses or other structures like garages or sheds or barns. You cannot haul the tree debris off that you take away from those structures on fences and personal property. Just keep that in mind. Again, here's an example where we would probably go ahead and pay for this portion of the tree, maybe not the whole tree. We may make a cut. It depends on the size of the tree, but let's say this tree was 30 foot on this side and 30 foot on the other side in the neighbor's yard. It was a 60-foot tree. It fell right in the middle on the fencing. We're going to pay for the fencing, but we're probably not going to pay for that whole 30 foot on each side, 60 foot. Why? The tree is not covered. We only need to cut a portion of the tree off of the area of the fencing to make the repairs to the fencing. So just keep that in mind. And again, we can't haul that tree debris away. Once we take it off, we can cut and drop, get it away from the fence. That's it. We can't haul it off. Another good example. Yeah, we would pay for this fencing. We'd probably not pay for certainly this part of the tree. That has nothing to do with the fencing generally. We wouldn't pay for that. We would make a cut over here somewhere, probably a cut out here. Maybe there's some other limbs it looks like down here on the fencing that may be damaging the fence. So make cuts a reasonable distance on each side away from the fence so that the contractors can repair the fence. That is the tree portion that we would pay for. We would get it away from the fence, cut and drop, and that is all. We would not pay to haul that tree debris away that we took from the fencing, and we would not pay for any of the trees at all that weren't close to the fence or had nothing to do with impeding the repair. This is a tree fallen on some personal property. This looks like it's in a park, but we'll just pretend that it's a swing set or a play set in the backyard of the insured. We would pay for the swing set. Of course, it's covered from the falling trees, and we would pay for a portion of the tree that was reasonable to get off of that structure and get it on the ground, and we would not pay to haul that tree debris away. So we'd probably make a cut somewhere down here. We'd pay to get all this off on the ground, whatever that cost, and we would not pay to remove the stump at all or grind it. We would just leave it there. And then what we took off right here, we would not pay to haul that tree debris away from the property. We would cut it and drop it and get it on the ground away from the area, and then we would stop. So let's talk a little bit about tree debris. As you may have surmised or may already know, there are separate coverages for cut and drop off of structures. That would be getting trees or limbs off of covered structures and onto the ground and stopping right there. Then there's a separate coverage for cutting up and hauling away that tree debris that we took off those structures. Going back to the cut and drop side, that is the amount of money that needs to be paid to properly do that. You have up to the policy limit for the structure to pay for that cut and drop. So for instance, if you have a large tree that fell on a house and you think, or the contractor says, it's going to take $10,000 to get the tree off safely and onto the ground, not hauling it off, but onto the ground, you have up to the policy limit of that dwelling to pay for that. If you have a $300,000 limit on the house, you have up to $300,000 for tree debris, or rather to pull trees down off of the structure of the house. You're not going to ever use that in the real world, but just keep in mind you have a lot of limit to deal with on cut and drop. The same thing for garages or other structures. You may have $30,000 or $40,000 of coverage, and you have a tree or two on a fence or a garage. You have up to, within that limit, to pay to get those trees off of those structures onto the ground. Then you have a separate coverage for hauling that tree debris off. Remember, you can't pay for that to haul that tree debris off from fences or personal property, but for the dwellings and other structures, you can. Once the trees are on the ground, we've taken that off, we can pay a separate coverage and a separate coverage limit to haul that tree debris off. Usually that is a $500 limit. It's a separate coverage that you have to set up and Xactimate manually. We'll do that in the second video when we're writing tree debris. But you do have to set up manually a separate coverage. It's typically called tree debris or tree debris removal. You're going to put a $500 limit in that. There are some caveats to that. On the American Family Advanced policy, it has a little bit higher limit on that. It has a $1,000 limit to haul tree debris away, but it has a $500 limit per tree. It has a total of $1,000. But if it's only one tree that you're paying to haul off that you took off, you can only pay $500 per tree. Most other policies have a $500 limit, period, no matter how many trees. One thing we'll look at on the second video, and it's very, very common, you always want to pay attention to this. A red flag should come up when you have trees on houses or limbs on houses and garages and things, is because the tree debris haul-off policy limit is usually so low, $500 or $1,000, it's very common that the dollar amount that it's going to take to haul all that tree debris away is going to be far above that limit. So that means we're going to be exceeding policy limits. Very common to do that on trees. The thing to remember is when we're exceeding policy limits, any policy limits, but it's very common with trees, we can do what's calling absorbing deductibles. In other words, we can basically make the deductible for the policy be absorbed in the excess over the limits if we're exceeding limits. In other words, if we have a $500 limit to haul tree debris away, but we think it's going to take $3,000 to haul that tree debris away, but we only have a $500 limit to pay for that on the policy, that means we're over that policy limit by $2,500. If the insured has a $1,000 deductible, we can move the deductible and Xactimate into that excess, that $2,500 that we cannot pay for, but we can move the deductible over into that excess, and basically it makes the deductible go away. It's called absorbing the deductible. And the effect of that is that the deductible will not be applied to the claim. In other words, we're putting the deductible back in the insured's pocket. They do not have to pay the deductible. We'll talk about that a little bit more and show you how to do that when we get to the second video of how to write. So here's a couple of pictures of tree debris. Let's talk a little bit about how you're going to deal with this and write it and deal with it with photos and things in the field. So there's generally going to be 4 scenarios. You're going to show up, and within 2 scenarios, there'll be 2 other scenarios. The 2 scenarios initially are, 1, the trees are still going to be on the structures. No one's taken them off yet. The insured hasn't done it. Contractor hasn't done it. There is going to be 2 sub-scenarios of that. Either the insured is going to take it off, or they're going to get a contractor to do it. We'll talk about that shortly. The second main scenario is you show up to the risk and the trees are gone. or their trees are gone, but the tree debris is left, like this photo here, for instance. So again, two sub scenarios. Who took the trees off? Did the insured and their son, did they take it off? Or did the insured hire a contractor to do it? So let's go back and start with the first one. So the first thing you're always going to want to do when you show up and see trees is, if the trees are still there or they're not, is ask the insured, have they had a contractor come by? If there's trees still there, say, did you ask the insured, did you have a contractor come by and look at this and give you an estimate? If they did, then you need to get a copy of that estimate. Take a picture of it, look at it, look at the tree. If you think it's reasonable, you can use that estimate in your estimate that you write. You can use a bid line item. However, you have to make sure that the contractor splits the coverages out. Remember, we talked about that, different coverages. Most tree contractors these days know about this and they'll do it, but they may not. So for instance, if they have an estimate that the contractor has and the insured gives you, and it says, remove tree from house and haul away. And it has that one line item and it says $3,000. Now you can look at the tree and you can say, yep, I think that's reasonable. However, I need the contractor to split this out because we're going to pay for the cut and drop to get it on the ground under the dwelling coverage. And we're going to pay to haul the rest of the tree debris away under the tree debris coverage. And because the contractor has not split that out for us, we as adjusters are not authorized to make that arbitrary decision of where we split that $3,000 out. In other words, we're not allowed to say, well, we're going to take $2,000 out of that $3,000 he estimated. We're going to put that to the cut and drop, and we're going to say it's another $1,000 to haul the tree debris away. Or any type of combination of split, we're not allowed to do that. If there is a written estimate from a contractor, they have to split it out. You may agree with the price overall, but you would have to go get with the contractor and ask them to rewrite the estimate and give that to you and have them split that out. And basically you would just tell them, hey, Mr. Contractor, I agree with the $3,000, no problem. What I need you to do is split those out into two line items and say, take tree off of house, $1,500. Haul tree debris taken off of house, $1,500. Total $3,000. That would be perfect, because now you need to have that split so that you can assign that dollar amount to the two separate coverages. It could be multiple coverages. It could be the tree is on, you got trees on the house, the garage. So now we have to have that split out into three separate prices. What it's going to take to haul or to cut the tree and haul it, get it off of the house on the ground, that price. That's under the dwelling coverage. We need that dollar amount. How much is it going to take trees off of other structures? That could be garages, sheds, fencing. How much is it going to cost to do the cut and drop on that? Separate price. That'll be under coverage B or coverage A dwelling extensions for American family policies. 3, how much is it going to cost to haul that tree debris away? But remember, in this scenario with the 3 coverages, we cannot include the tree debris haul off on the fencing, just the garage and sheds. But we still need that split out if it's an estimate from a contractor. So keep that in mind. If you show up and the insured says, nope, I haven't had anybody come out and look at the trees, then you have to go ahead and estimate for that. We don't have any pricing. The insured may do it. We don't know. However, we're going to go ahead and estimate for that. Now, you may or may not have experience in this. What I would suggest is try to figure it out on an hourly basis, because that's what you're going to have to use, a certain line item per hour, plus any cranes you may use, of course. But the way AFIX wants it written is using a particular line item that's per hour. So I would recommend trying to figure out how many hours do you think it would take to get that tree off, number one, off the house and on the ground. Remember, we have to split this out. And I would say, maybe 2 to 3 workers with chainsaws, what you think it's reasonable for them to make cuts and get that tree or trees onto the ground. and stop there. That would be what you would write down on your scope sheet. 3 workers, maybe you said, depending, again, this is case specific. It may be multiple trees, it may be one tree, it may be a small tree that only needs 1 person, it may be one gigantic tree that needs 3 or 4 people. It's a case-by-case basis. You have to use common sense. But in any case, you try to figure out how many workers you think need to be involved with chainsaws and making cuts, and how many hours all of them need to be there to get that tree or tree off of the structures onto the ground. Write that down. Later, when you get a little bit more experienced at this, you may be able to look at a tree and say, no, it's going to take about $3,000 to get that tree onto the ground. I would start by using hourly rates in your mind. That's the way you want to try to adjust and estimate for. So that kind of concludes this. Oops, I'm sorry, I did forget one other, the second set of scenarios. If you show up and the trees are already gone, you always ask the insured, who did the removal? Did you do it, or did the contractor remove it? If the insured said they did it, that's fine. We'll pay the insured for that work. Again, we'll still have to split all that out. We have to talk to the insured and get those numbers. But maybe they say, oh, me and my neighbor and my son, we did all the work. Okay, so 3 people, how long did it take you to remove the tree from the house? And if they say 8 hours, okay, that's 3 people at 8 hours, that's 24 hours. And then make sure they understand that it needs to be split out. That's just to get the tree onto the ground. If they say 8 hours, then you may ask them, how long did it take you to haul the tree debris away? It took us another 8 hours. Okay, pay another 24 hours if you think it's reasonable. If a contractor did it, get an invoice from them. They will have an invoice. If not, you need to get that from the contractor. Again, that invoice needs to be split out. You cannot have an invoice with one line item that includes the cut and drop and haul off. It has to be split out. The last instances is, let's say in this scenario here, these pictures we're saying is, if the contractor was there or the insured's there and they made the cuts and they did the cut and drop, but now they've cut some of this up and they haven't hauled it away. So we need to figure this out. If the insured is doing this, you can ask them how many hours they've already spent cutting the tree up, and you can estimate how long, in addition to that, it may be to haul this off, and you can get an hourly rate and a number of hours. If it's a contractor that's done some of this and the insured said they're going to come back, then you would probably need to wait for that invoice, or you could pay a portion of it or get some of the invoice. If not, the insured may have to get the whole invoice when all the work is done. And if that's not within your cycle time to get that, I would recommend trying to do that. But maybe the contractor can't get back out there for the next week or so to clear the debris away. They're very busy. You may not be able to get that invoice from them and include it in your side of the estimate. If that's the case, just let the insured know. No problem. Just when you get that invoice from your contractor, when all the work is done and completed, submit that to your desk adjuster, and they'll handle that on the backside as a supplement. So I think that completes this video. If you have any questions, as always, contact your manager or claim supervisor. Trees are always a tricky thing to learn, and certainly even if you're somewhat experienced at it, they're a little bit more tedious and difficult on how to deal with properly because it's such a case-by-case basis. We have coverage limitations, things like that, and splitting out different coverages. So it's a little more tedious process to do this properly. But again, if you have any questions, give us a call. We'll be more than happy to help you. Hope you have a great day. Please look at the next video on how to write trees in Xactimate. Thanks.